Hi, my name's Rich Harrington, and I am the author of Understanding Adobe Photoshop CS5 and the book Photoshop for Video. And today I'd like to share with you a handful of holiday touch-up techniques. So we're going to tackle several images that you might take on your own this holiday season, and I'm going to show you some common problems that tend to pop up and how to fix them. So let's jump right in. Let's switch on over to Adobe Bridge, and I've just grabbed 12 different images from the past holidays. And let's just give a little disclaimer here. These are my kids, and I am recording this on Christmas Eve while waiting for Santa to arrive at our house. So this is my gift to you, and I apologize for any scratchiness or late nightness of this, but I'd just like to share some practical techniques. So let's jump in. We'll start with this one here, and this is a good example of a common problem with pictures taken during the holiday season. And that is, there's lots of different things happening. In this case, it's a holiday pageant, and there's just a bunch of kids, but I'd like to zoom the action in on one particular one, which is my son. So let's go ahead and get started. That's our primary goal of the fix, but I'm going to show you a couple of other things as well. Let's go ahead and double click, and that will come into the Camera Raw dialog box. We'll go ahead and click Auto for auto exposure, and that goes ahead and made a few adjustments there. I'm going to bring in the exposure just a little bit and recover some of the blown out highlights. We'll fill in the vibrance to really bring out the colors without oversaturating the skin tones, and a little bit of clarity for some selective contrast. Now, the best way to judge that is to go on into 100% and take a look. And you see that's working pretty well. What we do have happening there is a bit of noise, though, in the grain structure, and that's going to be pretty easy to clean up. So let's just bounce on through, and we'll go in and take care of some of that noise. We'll go into detail here, and we'll start to reduce some of the noise in the image. So as I pull that over, you see if we go too far, it's going to look a little too smooth and porcelain. So we'll back that off. But that's looking pretty good there. Right about there. And we'll cut down a little bit of color noise as well to clean that up. If I toggle that off and on, you'll see that we went from a lot of grain to nice smooth skin, and that really helped. So that's looking pretty good. That grain was, there because this was shot under relatively low light as well as at a long lens. And I'm going to go ahead and click Open Image. So that brings it in. There we go. Let's get out of full screen mode. And let's start by selecting the crop tool. C for crop. Now when you choose the crop tool, I'm just going to go with a freeform crop to begin. We're going to start to go in on the action. Now when you do this, you start to get the composition guide, and that's really good. But before I apply this, I want to take advantage of cropping non-destructively. So let's press Escape first. Before I crop, I'm going to double click and float this layer. Just give it a quick name. And then grab the crop tool and crop out the shot that I want. There we go. There's our composition for the rule of thirds. And I could try to place him at one of those intersection points. And I think I'll do that because this particular child here isn't really a good part of the shot. That's looking pretty good. I've got a nice rule of thirds there. Intersection of his eye right at that cross point. We'll tuck that in just a little bit. There we go. And instead of choosing delete up here in the cropped area, I'm going to choose hide. And what that does is it actually hides the pixels instead of discarding them. And we can click return or enter, and you see it's applied. Now let's just go ahead and hide the slices real quick. And the advantage there of that being hidden is that if I need to, I can move this image around inside of the crop until I get the position that I want. It gives me a little bit more flexibility. Now it's looking pretty good, and what I'd like to do is just defocus these children that are a little further away from him, and I'll do that with the lens blur. So let's go over to channels for a second, make this image a little bigger, and under channels I'm going to make a new alpha channel, and if we look at that there, we want to create a gradual transition. So I'll grab the black to white gradient, and we'll create a little transition here, sort of between him and the other kids. There we go. And if you look at that alpha channel, turning it off and on, what you see there is a definite transition zone. Now you want to thin that out a little bit, you can drag it a little more. and get a nice transition point. I'll select the RGB channels, turn the alpha off, and go back to layers, and I can now say filter, blur, lens blur. Now the lens blur filter is quite nice. It allows you to blur the image, and it even allows you to use the alpha channel as an actual depth mat. So as you play with that there, you can go ahead and have things sort of fall out of focus and decide what's in focus. If you need to, just uncheck invert there. And as you see, the girls are falling out of focus while he remains in focus, and that's what I want. That's looking pretty good. Put just a little bit of noise back in to preserve the grain structure. See, too much, back that off, maybe around 1. Looks good, and I'll click OK. And once we've done that, the image is filtered. Now the reason why you're seeing the whole image there is that, remember, when we cropped, we simply hid the image. We didn't actually delete the pixels. That looks good. Goes ahead and applies. And in a second here, it's going to kick us out back into the image, and you will see that applied to the image itself. Now what I like about the lens blur is that great flexibility of using the alpha channel as a depth mat. And when you combine that with the gradient, you can really create a nice ramped transparency. So even if you didn't have total control over your depth of field when shooting, you can easily regain that during the post-production phase. There we go. We've got that post-processing. He's clearly the area of focus. That looks great. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this tag down here real quick. Let's zoom in. Z for the zoom tool and the magnifying glass tool. Actually, that changed in newer Photoshop. And we'll just go in there. S for clone stamp. Option click. Line that up. There we go. And just take that out. I like to do lots of several little clicks, so that's gentle blending as opposed to doing too much. And I'll often lower the opacity like you see there, so the tool's at 40%. So I can take several strokes and sort of build them up to create that transition so it's not too heavy-handed. There we go. Zoom back out, and that took care of it. So that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and save that. And we'll just store that out to our process folder. And we'll call that crop 1. Good. There's our first image and done. And I hope you're enjoying this process. Let's jump on in and go to our next image. Our next one here is a picture of snow. And it's just a snowstorm. It was a couple days after Christmas last year, and they went out sledding. But there's sort of a bluish tint as well as a lot of angle to this picture that doesn't need to be there. So let's perform some quick triage approaches and get this image back in place. I'm going to double click and send that into RAW. And one of the first things I'm going to do is straighten the image. So I'll click up here, grab the straighten tool, and go along a straight line. Once I do that, you'll see that it recommends that as the crop for the image. Now I can size that a little bit, but that definitely fixed the image and got it straight. If I hit return there, you see that now they're not quite so crooked. Let's go ahead and click auto, not a bad place to start. We'll bring the exposure up just a little, and that's looking pretty good. What I'm going to do is manually white balance. So I'll grab the white balance tool here, find the snow, an area that should be white but isn't, and click. And you see that that definitely took care of a whole bunch of stuff there. Look at how that color tint is now removed. Things are looking pretty good. I didn't have a flash here, and you see the faces are just a tad dark. So we'll grab the exposure brush. Here we go, adjustment brush, and we'll bring the exposure up just a little bit. Let's just pull brightness down. There we go. And as we brighten it, we'll put a little saturation in and a little clarity, and we'll just brush over the faces. And you see that that brings them out a bit. There we go. Just lifting those. Looks a lot better. Check it out. Looks pretty good. Let's go back to our normal tools here for a second. I'm going to put just a little bit of stylization on here. We're going to go ahead and put some vignette in. Let's take a look here at effects. Put a little bit of a post-crop vignette, either pushing it out to white, which actually I kind of like in this case. It draws the viewer's eye to the middle. I think going dark would seem a little weird here since we're outdoors and it's so bright. Although that's not bad. So really up to you. Sort of blow it out for a vignette look, or darken it down for your traditional dark edge burn. And I think I'm going to go with white, so sort of a traditional faded edge. That looks pretty good. Play with the roundness in the feather, just a little softer. That looks nice. And we'll click Open Image. And there we have it. Now there's more we can do here, but you see we were able to quickly fix some of the big problems. If I want to brighten up the snow a little bit, pretty easy to do. I'll just grab the quick selection tool and start to click and get a decent selection of the snow. There we go. Hold down the Shift key there to add that non-contiguous area. That looks pretty good. A little bit more. Good. And what we can do here is we can enhance this in several ways. I'm just going to take a down and dirty approach, and we'll choose the Refine Edge option. Tell it to do a smart radius, so it analyzes those edges a little bit. Creates a nice, gentle sort of transition. I'll feather that just a bit, and output that to a selection. And now I'm just going to toss on an additional levels adjustment and just open up that mid-tone a little bit and push the whites over as well. That looks pretty good. There we go. And you can always toggle that off and on. If it's a little strong, back off the opacity so it sort of blends the adjustment back. I think that looks pretty good. Let's jump in here and deal with a very typical problem, which is going to happen when you are taking pictures in low light, and that is Redeye. Now I'm going to show you how to do this two ways. Let's just open this image as is, and then jump back here and we'll fix it in Camera Raw first. Zoom in, grab the Redeye tool, and we can adjust the pupil size here and how much we want to darken it. Now he wants us to drag in and let go, and you see it did a pretty good job of targeting that. We can go ahead and darken that down just a little bit, play with it, and let's get this one. There we go. Got the one, let's get the other. There. Now, if it doesn't get big enough or it's a tricky area there, you might need to keep dragging, and you see it does okay. Now, the advantage there of doing this in RAW is that it's pretty flexible. To be honest though, I tend to fix Redeye over here in the normal Photoshop because I find it a little bit easier to tackle. Let's zoom in, and there are several ways to go about this, but if you look inside the healing brush, there actually is a Redeye tool. And what this allows you to do is come in here and start to darken it down. Now, if you just click there, you see it did a pretty good job of detecting. I'm going to back that off with undo, darken it down a little bit more, and click again. That looked better. Click over here, and it did it. So if we pull out, we see that did a nice job. Zoom in here. We'll just finish this out. Now there's a little too much there, so undo. Decrease the pupil size just a little bit because this girl's farther away. And click, and click, and that did a nice job. So you see we were able to take care of the Redeye, and that's done. So, real common problem. Remember, Redeye is caused by the eye not having enough time to adjust to the lighting. So if you take flash photography and you don't use sort of a strobe setting or give your subject a chance to sort of get used to the flash photography, first couple pictures you take with flash under low light will tend to bounce back that red. Alright, let's switch on over here and go to our next one, which is this nighttime shot. And I'm going to open this up. Now, nighttime shots can be really tricky. In this particular one, I did use a flash to fill the kids in a little bit, but we also got some subjects in the background we don't want, and it's tricky to get the exposure on the lights proper. Let's start by just getting a straight image to begin with. We'll click and use this line right here as a guide. That looks pretty good. I'll back that off just a little. And let's apply that. Now it's straight. We'll go ahead and click Auto for exposure for a second. And that's looking better on the kids. Definitely brought those up with a little bit of fill light. You see they really came in nicely. But recover to bring down some of those highlights that might be getting a little overexposed. And I'll fill that back in with some blacks so the background starts to fall off again. That's looking pretty good. Let's grab that exposure brush there, the adjustment brush, and we'll just paint in a little bit on the faces to bring them out. That looks good. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a new one here, and we'll pull the exposure down and just paint over the tree. And you see by doing that we can sort of knock down the tree a bit and get those nice lights without totally blowing it out. That looks good. Darken these people down just a little bit as well, painting over the background. And you see how we can preserve some of those lights, but we can get rid of some of those folks. If you check the auto mask button, watch this. It actually does a pretty good job of detecting edges and won't really affect the girl too much here. That's looking good. If we need to erase a little bit like we did here, we can remove anything that got onto the toy, and that looks good. Let's go ahead and open that image up, and we'll finish this out with just a little darkening. Now I'm pretty happy with that. Zoom in here. Shadow on the side there, no big deal. We'll just option click with the clone stamp tool and fill that in. Lower opacity there, about 40%, just makes that nice and blends. There we go. Just brings that out a little. Good. Looking pretty good there. I'm just going to simplify that down a little bit. The face is a little distracting. There we go. And let's just darken these people down. We'll go ahead and take advantage and use just a little bit of burning. And we'll just pull that down. Now you could uncheck protect tones in this case, and it will actually really start to knock those out. And let's just finish that out. And you see we can really take care of those background people that are distracting. So when doing nighttime photography, I'll usually, if have raw, work the adjustment brush angle, but then fill out the shadows using the burn tool there. You see there we could just do multiple little clicks until we push that person back into the shadows. There we go. Left bracket smaller brush, and you can get anything you need to there. Good. And let's see what we have left. Just a little bit there in the shadows, and we'll pull those people out. Right bracket bigger brush. If we need to, we could increase the exposure there. I'll take that up to 80% so the brush is a little bit more aggressive. And that was better than just painting with black. Zoom back out. And you see we've really removed a lot of the distracting elements. We can see the kids nicely. The background looks clear even though it was a busy night at the amusement park. And the holiday lights are nicely coming through. Alright, let's go back to Bridge and go the opposite direction, which are overblown highlights. So let's say it's the holiday morning and you've got a lot of light coming in through the windows. Well, what can you do? Well, again, there's nothing wrong with auto. I promise I won't tell anyone. The big thing you're dealing here is with exposure. So you got a choice to make. Do you want to pull down all of everything here and sort of recover that? And you see it gets a little tough, right? So I'm going to go ahead and leave exposure at a decent value, going off of the subject here, the kids, so they look good. And then we'll use the recovery slider to further pull down the windows. Now that's looking pretty good. We can play with blacks a little bit to bring in a contrast. And let's just tone the brightness down a bit more. Bring exposure back up. Looking pretty good. We can paint on the faces there with the adjustment brush. We'll set that back up to about plus 0.25. Paint the faces there with the auto mask option. And it does a good job of picking up the edges. Good. make a new adjustment brush, and we're going to pull that way down and paint on that window. And you see we can sort of get that blown out sky to come down. Now, it's just winter out there and snow and just sky, so there's not that much detail, but we're able to bring a lot of that back. That looks good. I'm going to grab the crop tool and click, and this time choose a particular size. So I'm going to go for a 5x7 and start to crop, and you see it constrains. Now you can either go portrait or landscape, and as you start to drag, you'll see it snaps between the two shapes. That's looking pretty good. Pull that over, and I like that. Actually, we can go ahead and go that way. I think that's a little better. And got good composition. Hit return, and we have it. So you see there we're able to remove some of the distracting elements as well as deal with exposure issues in the background. Let's switch on over, tackle our next image here, and we'll open this one up. And I'm just going to sort of leave this as is and not do too much in RAW and treat this like it was a JPEG. So in case you shot this without having the benefit of shooting with camera RAW, we'll open that up. And let's say this was a crooked image. How could we fix that? Well, if you take the measure tool, and you'll find that tool nestled in with the ruler, okay? You can go ahead under the eyedropper. There is the ruler tool. And you could find something that should be straight. Now in this case it's a little tricky, but I'm going to go off of her eyes and just go right between across the bridge of the nose there. And I'll click straighten. When I do that, you see it did do a good job straightening. Now that was a little too much though, so let's back that off and we'll just undo and we'll split the difference. Let's see here, we'll go across her two shoulders. There we go. And click straighten. There. Now that definitely got in. If you wanted to preserve some of that and you say, well, that's great, I'm glad it's straight, but I didn't want to lose all that background. Well, in that case, instead of using the straighten command, you're going to do it a little bit differently. You're going to go ahead and draw that line and choose image, rotate, arbitrary. And that'll plug in that measurement for you. So you see there is a difference there, and that works pretty well if you want to sort of preserve some of that area. So now with the clone stamp tool, right bracket for a bigger brush, we can go ahead and sort of brush in some of that background. I'll take that back up to 100%. And what I'm just doing is extending that so we've got a little bit more to work with. Fill that in, nice soft Christmas tree back there. A little bit of reflected lights. There we go. Love how that brush preview there gives you a nice idea of what you're working with. And that really helps sort of fill that in for you as you're working. Good. That's looking nice. Put a little bit more off to here on the side. There we go. And you see we can literally just sort of paint and sample and blend those all together. That works nicely. There we go. We'll just paint a little more in. Try to avoid getting too regular of a pattern. And that's working pretty well. There we go. And just paint. Now, you can finesse this for a very long time. Once you're basically happy, you can go in with your crop. And again, the whole purpose there of doing that manual rotation was so we could really sort of get in there and decide what part of the image we wanted to keep and what part we wanted to get rid of. Again, clone stamp tool is your friend here. You can use it to sort of fill in any patterns or deal with any gaps that you might have in the image. And we'll just fill this in a little bit. There we go. And that worked nicely. Remember, lower opacity brush strokes can come in handy to sort of build things up. And that left bracket is going to give you that smaller brush if you need to blend anything in. There we go. Let's just paint. Good. Now this is just about right, but I want to go ahead and tighten up the sharpness a little bit. We'll go ahead under Filter, and let's go down to Sharpen, and we'll do the Smart Sharpen. Key here is to take a look sort of at the eye area. Again, this is under pretty low light, so I can only do so much. We'll back that amount off a little bit, and we tell it we want to get rid of lens blur. And we'll just take that up until we're happy. Toggle it off and on to sort of see a before and after. That's helping. Tweak the radius, and then hit OK, and you see that tightens it up. I'm actually going to go ahead and, though, turn right around and go with the sort of softness of it by doing a little bit of a Pro Mist type filter. Let's choose Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, and this allows you to non-destructively apply filters. So I'm going to go ahead and toss on a real healthy Gaussian blur. Now you might be wondering why we're pushing that so far. We're going to go in and take that out a bit, and then double click the little blending arrow here in the Layers panel. When you do that, you could change blend mode. So we'll go with something like soft light, or maybe a little bit of screen, and you see how it sort of blooms it out nicely. You could back off the opacity, but that can give you a really nice sort of Pro Mist effect. I think I like that soft light better there, and I'll back the opacity to where I like it. That looks good. And you see without and with how that just smoothed out some of the skin, really brought out nice vibrance here. Good color. I think that looks nice. I'll finish this out with just a little bit of a vignette. Toss on the gradient. We'll go from black to transparent. You could pick that here from the list. We'll go radial, and let's just reverse that and scale this as needed, adjusting the angle. That looks good. You can even move that around within the window. And then drop that to multiply and set it to about 40%. And what that does is give you a nice little darkening at the edges, as you see there, without getting too heavy-handed. That looks nice. Let's go ahead and save that. There we go. Now, one thing people don't realize is that the TIFF file format can actually support layers, so I actually tend to use that quite a bit. I like the smaller file sizes because they can be compressed, but when you uncompress them, you've got all the Photoshop layers intact. All right, let's go ahead and open up an image here. And again, we'll just go ahead and do a quick crop on this, but I'm not going to do it in Camera Raw. We're going to pretend that this was shot JPEG, so let's just get that where we want it real quick. A little vibrance and clarity, and open that image up. And what I want to show you is that you have complete control over the target size. So if you press C for crop, you could type in the exact width and height. So maybe you were going to print this image out and put it into a square frame for the holidays. Well, you open that frame up from Target or Walmart or your favorite retailer, you can go ahead and measure out the hole that you need, or the printed size that's on the frame. For example, a 5-inch frame, I could say 5IN by 5IN and assign a pixel resolution of 300 ppi, which will work well for my photo printer. Now, before I crop, double click, make it a layer. This way when we crop, it's non-destructive. Notice there, it's forcing that and giving us that nice composition. Now that looks good. I've got the square composition. Place it, rule of thirds, and I'm going to hit apply, and we got it. Now there's a little bit of distraction in here, and this is sort of up to you how you get rid of it. I'm just going to actually sort of fill it in with a little bit of this fabric here. Let's grab the quick selection tool and sort of drag through. See if I can grab that fabric. Pretty good. Click Refine Edge, Smart Radius, and feather that out a bit. Notice there we've got control over smoothness and feather. That's looking pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and output that to a new layer with a layer mask and click OK. So what we have here is a new layer sort of sitting on top. You can grab your paintbrush tool whenever, and with the mask selected over here, paint right on the mask with white to reveal or with black to hide. That works pretty well. There we go. Let's go ahead with that layer selected, Command T for free transform, and we will go ahead and flip it. And now we can sort of nudge that into place. There we go. Looking pretty good. Hit apply. Remember, non-destructive here with the mask, so we'll just grab our paintbrush and paint with white. Grab our regular brush tool. Click on the mask so it's selected. And we'll just paint that in. Again, it's all non-destructive. Flip over at any time to the color you need. Paint that chin in a little bit. There we go. And we just filled that hole in nicely, blocking out that area we didn't want. Now there's little stray pixels in there, so we'll just lasso around those and quickly fill that with black. There we go. And that cleans up those edges. Looks nice and good there. If I want to, I could run a little bit of a Gaussian blur on that mask just to soften it up a bit. There we go. And I think that's pretty good. We filled in that problem area. And let's go ahead and save that. And we're done. Now, notice if we check the image size, it's exactly 5 inches by 5 inches at 300 pixels an inch, which is exactly what we told it to in the crop tool. So you see that's highly accurate. You can crop and resize all in one step. Let's jump on over here and deal with another issue. We've got some eyes here, same sort of problem, sort of getting hidden by the face. Let's review a couple things we did before. Eyedropper, white balance on the snow, looking good. Auto, and we'll recover, bring the exposure up a little bit. Looks pretty good. Play with the brightness there until we get the sort of balance between lights and darks that we want. Round out the blacks if you need to punch them a bit. And then you could deal with vibrance to boost the colors on non-skin tones. That looks pretty good. Let's hit open. Come on into the face here. And we're going to select half the face. Now, I'm going to take the quick selection brush and start to brush. You see it did a good job of detecting the face. And now, with the polygonal lasso, I'm just going to go right down the middle of the face. Hold down the Option key, or Alt on a PC. There we go. Got it. Q for a quick mask. Grab my paintbrush tool, and I could paint to add a little more. Just going to put a little bit of that hat in there, and transition there near the ears. Good. Q for quick mask to exit, and we will simply press Command J to jump a copy of the background up, and then Command T for free transform, where we can flip it horizontally. Now, we can freely sort of rotate this into place. It's getting pretty close. Sort of move that in where we want it. And hit return. And now with the layer mask applied, you can just grab your paintbrush and start to paint away what you don't want to keep. So there we go. We'll just paint her nose back in. Let her real nose and lips shine. There we go. Blend that in with the chin. And the hair there. Got a little too farther with the hat, so we'll paint that back. That looks pretty good. Soft transition there around the eyes. And you can paint back what you need. But I just want that eye to show back through. There we go. So we are able to bring the hidden eyes back out, and you can always nudge that into place. Now, you could spend a little more time cleaning that up, but the point being, sometimes you can go with symmetry and just use the free transform tool to fill things in. Let's pull that back out, go back over to Bridge, and deal with another problem that's sort of similar, and that is two different pictures. And in neither one were the kids perfect. Now, this is my life, but I'm sure you might relate to this, where you've got, a better face in one picture than the other. Let's just go ahead and open those two images up, and we'll just grab them both, open them into RAW, adjust the first image to taste, do a little recovery there, and a little fill light. Happy with that? Click over here to lift that. We can go ahead and hit select all and then choose synchronize, and all the settings will match between the two images there. There we go. Let's go ahead and open those two images, and they'll place them both into Photoshop. And I'm going to grab those two images and put one on top of the other. Now, let me say I have done zero rehearsing with these things. I literally just picked these images out before I sat down. And in some cases, some of these repairs are better than others. So I really don't know if this is going to work. But the concept here is if we paste two images together and we grab the image here from over here, copy, and then paste it in here, with both layers selected, you could choose the Move tool and use this little option here that actually auto aligns the layers. So let's see how that works. We're going to go ahead and choose Auto Align. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to put the image on top that I like better. I think that one's good. I like the boy's face better, and Santa's great, but I'd like the face down here. I think she looks a little cuter. Let's see if we can auto align these and take care of it. We'll choose Auto and click OK. Let Photoshop do its analysis and see what it can come up with. Now you see there it actually bent the pictures and attempted to align them, and it did pretty well. The buckle's pretty close to a line there. If I want, I can drop this down to difference mode and sometimes use that to sort of nudge things around until they line up a little better. I think that's actually doing pretty well there. In this case, I'm going off of the girl's face, and you see I've lined up her eyes pretty well. Set that back to normal. And what we can do here is, that's looking pretty good. Let's put the face back on top. We will select her head with the quick selection tool. Using that quick selection tool does a pretty good job. There we go. We'll click Refine Edge and tell it to do a smart radius with a nice healthy radius so it analyzes that edge, picks up the hair really well, smooth things out, and feather. And then I'm going to shift the edge a bit so it expands a bit beyond her. That looks pretty good. We'll output that with a layer mask and click OK. And you see that her head is literally dropped in on top of her body. Now we can sort of nudge that into place here. There we go. Lined up the neck. Grab the layer mask there, and I'm going to paint with white to blend things in. There we go. And we're just using a nice healthy brush to blend the two images. As I do that, you see that white is sort of painting in some of the details from behind. There we go. Or I could flip over to black and sort of mask that image so it blends in a little bit with what's there. So we can sort of let that backdrop point through around her head. Now nothing says you have to use 100% opacity, so going lower might give you a little bit more gentle transitions, as we see there. There we go. Painting with a lower opacity brush. And we were able to steal two smiles to get a cuter picture. Now I could finesse this just a little bit down here, lower opacity brush, mixing that in. There we go. And that looks good. So overall, needs to be cropped. We've had a little bit of distortion here, but even though I was handheld, Photoshop was able to warp those pictures and line up critical details. Let's go ahead with the crop tool. We'll click here and choose a standard one, such as 5x7. And if it's not the size I want, I could just go ahead here and swap these by clicking the two arrows, and now it's a 7x5. There we go. Target it, looks good. Hit the return key, and we've got our better composition and our better smile how we want it. Now, let's see where we left off. Got just a couple images left, 3 more to talk through. I'm just going to show you a couple of different techniques to round this out for the holiday season. First off, one of the things that's awesome in Photoshop CS5 is the lens profile. So if we open up this image, I actually shot this on a wide angle lens, and it's causing a little bit of distortion that I'd like to get rid of. You sort of see how the ceiling's bending. So let's just quickly fix this, and we'll recover some of that blown out area. Grab the adjustment brush and we'll brush that area down a little bit there for the windows. I'm not going to worry about that too much because I'll probably crop around that. And let's go ahead over here and actually click on the tab for lens correction. And if I turn that on, it's going to go ahead and sort of analyze things. Now, I need to specify the camera, and this is a really new camera, so it might not actually show up. So I was using a D7000, and I had I believe it was a 30-105, but let's see if we've got anything close to that. And you see that different lenses will show up here. So as I'm looking through, I want to find the lens that most closely matches what I was working with. And this is pretty close, 24-120. Yep, actually I think that was the lens I was working with. And if we toggle that off and on, you see how it's fixing some of the bend. Now, in this particular case, that was correct for the camera body, but you could see that you might choose other options here, and you've got other profiles too. Now, you can manually fix this, adjusting the distortion to compensate, and you see how the edges sort of bend. And what I'm going off of is the center point. And you can also play with vignetting to either brighten or darken stylistically. Now if you click over to manual, you'll find even more options for doing things like rotating, and you see how it sort of automatically scales up. There we go. And I can scale that back up a little more, and you're really able to do a bunch of cool things all in one place. If you need to, you can go ahead and deal with the pincushion distortion. So you see there, compensate for any sort of wide angle lens or angles, and any sort of physical distortion. I was a little bit low when I took this picture, so I could play with the vertical transformation to help fix some of that. That looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and open that image, and you see a whole bunch of stuff was done all at once to the image, all sorts of transformation. So the cool thing with those lens profiles is you can actually look up the particular lens you used and do all sorts of other great transformations to repair an image. Let's just grab the clone stamp tool and we'll fill in a little bit of this carpet here. 100% opacity. There we go. And click on his leg. And we've finished that out. Now let's go on to our last 2 images. Here's just one that needs a little touch-up. I'm going to open this up. It's good. I want to just do a little bit of finessing here. We're going to go ahead, take advantage of the lens correction, and I'm going to turn that on. Define the type of camera. Notice here it picked up that this was a Nikon. It found the particular lens I was using, 70-200, which is correct, and it even loaded the right profile. So that's pretty cool that it was able to do all of that. It figured out the camera model and which lens to use. So if I toggle that off and on, you see that it's correcting for the darkening at the edges and a little bit of warping that's happening at the edges. So it fixed that, which is great. Now you can go ahead over to manual if necessary and tweak a little bit more, but it's really done a good job, unless you want to put a little vignette in there, which I'm going to do in this case on purpose to darken things a bit. And you could play with where that midpoint falls. Let's go back here to the basic here. We'll click auto, and we're going to put a little fill light in on her face and bring the blacks out so it's nice and crisp back there. That's looking good. I think I'm pretty happy with that. We got a few flyaway hairs, which we'll touch up in a second. And let's just deal with a little bit of sharpening. Always to judge sharpening, drop into 100%. And this is a pretty low light situation here, so I can't get that much back, but I will do a little sharpening with a little noise reduction to clean things up, and click open, and it's not too bad. That looks good. Grab the spot healing brush. Let's just grab that in there. J for healing brush. Zoom on in to the blemish. Left bracket smaller brush and paint. And when you release, it blends and heals. Now when I'm doing these types of adjustments, I like to bring the navigator up so I can see what's happening. And this makes it easier to sort of move around and deal with small problems. There we go. Paint over the blemish. And we're just getting rid of some little scratches and dust. Looks good. There we go. And the navigator makes that a lot easier. Plus you could zoom in and out there as needed. So, little rosacea here. I'm just holding down the space bar to move around. That works well. And I could paint over any blemishes I need to get rid of. And that looks nice. Now there's a few flyaway hairs, piece of cake. One of my favorite ways to get rid of these is to just use the smudge tool. So if you grab the smudge tool, you can set it to lighten or darken. I'm going to go ahead and use the darken mode. And by doing that, I can just push the dark pixels over the light hairs. So by going over those there and just using the actual background that's right there already, I can just push those flyaway hairs and hide them and just use the actual background texture. There we go. And you see how easy that is to just quickly touch up. Now, I'm flying through these adjustments because I don't want you to sit here and be bored, but you can go ahead and take your time on those and get a little better result. But even still, as a quick fix there, I think you see that that's pretty easy to go in and take care of any sort of problems. There we go. Actually, I see one more thing that bothers me. Her undershirt was just slipping a little bit there. So let's grab the clone stamp tool. We'll option click with the clone stamp tool to set our source point. Left bracket. And what I'm going to do here is make a new empty layer. And with the clone sample tool here, I'm going to tell it to sample all layers. This way, I could sample the skin and paint, but it's on its own layer. The advantage of that is if you go a little too far, because it's on its own layer, it's really easy to touch up. You see, you could toggle that off and on, and then just grab your eraser tool if you needed to, for example, to sort of clean that edge up. Okay, in that particular case, we'll just go with a nice soft eraser, left bracket, smaller, shift left bracket, softer. There we go. And we can just click right along that edge there to sort of blend that in, and that looks good. So, before, after, just a quick little touch up, and I like that. We'll save that. And we've got one image left. Now, this one looks nice as is. I'm just going to finish it out with a little processing and show you a couple of quick effects. Let's just open that up. Nice crisp blacks. Looks good. Put a little bit of clarity in so we get nice popping on the subtle details. And a little more contrast. And we'll open that up. And what I'm going to do here is a special look with black and white. So let's go ahead and choose Select Color Range, and we're going to tell it to select all the things that are green, and click OK. Now that creates a base selection, and we'll toss on the black and white adjustment. Now it was pretty subtle, so I'm going to do that manually because this target there for color range didn't get enough. So let's just try it again. Select color range, and we'll click on the green and just sort of drag through, and we could pull down the range if necessary, or the fuzziness so it's not as tolerant. That works well. There we go. Click OK. And now we toss on the adjustment layer. Now if you want, before you get out of there, you can always do refine edge. And I recommend a little bit of smart radius so it softens that up a bit. And we'll feather that a bit. That looks good. I'll put that as a selection. And once you have that, you can go ahead and apply an adjustment layer. There we go. We've got a selection. It's a pretty robust refine edge there, but notice how I did a nice job, soft transitions. And we'll click the black and white adjustment layer. And I'm not going to leave that as black and white, but what I'm going to do is change it to something like overlay, or perhaps soft light. And you see that that can really sort of pop that. And you could try all sorts of sort of different styles, or even click the tint option there and get that to sort of turn that into more of a sepia tone. So you see we're toning down that tree a bit and making everything else pop. If you want, you can go ahead and do all sorts of other adjustments in here. You can click and drag to sort of influence that conversion. What I'm trying to do is get a nice sort of aged look. Select all, copy merged, paste, and I'm going to strip the color out of that top layer. And let's just blur that. There we go. Auto levels and pop that a little bit in the middle. And set that to soft light. And you see how we're getting a nice sort of glow to the things in the picture here. I like that. Back that off just a little. It's looking good. And I'm going to just finish this out. Use a photo filter. And I'm going to warm this whole image up a little bit. I like how that's going. And it sort of takes on a nice antiqued sort of look. And to finish this out, we'll put on a black and white adjustment layer on top of this whole shebang. We'll go ahead and click Auto, and we can manually grab the On Image tool to tweak the black and white conversion until we're happy with it by just dragging on parts of the image, and it will affect the correct slider. I'm going to click Tint and drop that into a soft light mode or perhaps overlay. And you see, if you want to experiment, you could just use Shift plus and even step through those blending modes until you find the one you like. I kind of like that at Lighten, and we'll set that to 50%. And so if you look at the original image to where we took it, we softened things down and got just a nice sort of artistic look going where there's a nice brownish tone coming through with little twinkles of color. So, hope that gives you some ideas. Now, there's a lot of different things we covered in this lesson here. I just wanted to give you some techniques that you can use to fix up your holiday photos. And I really hope you enjoyed things tonight. My name is Rich Harrington. You are welcome to check out my personal blog at richardharringtonblog.com. And I really appreciate you watching this tutorial. Hope it helps you improve some of your holiday pictures.